It's been an amazing 2 years for me personally. I've never worked in a role that is so broad in its potential reach, that's so important to communities within a key part of the country, and from the world of Whitehall to, as I would see it, the real world of the West Midlands. It's been a really energising and very thought-provoking and important role, and it was always going to be 2 years. Completely clear about the need to embed what I've been doing into the core agencies, so I'm happy that we finished at a sensible transitional point.
Sounds like it's been an eye-opener. Now, obviously, you came here to impart some expertise to agencies in the Midlands, but are you going back also with some lessons learned about the challenges in the regions as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there have been three elements that have been most fundamental to my time here as I've seen things move on. First of all, at a broad level across the West Midlands, there is undoubtedly a sense of collaboration at the heart of decision making in this part of the country, which simply wasn't there, in my view, 2 years ago. I'm not saying that's all been down to the area of work that I've been involved in, though I think it's played its part. But the moves towards a combined authority, the general sense of a region that has for far too long felt a bit insular and a bit perhaps inferior to the northwest, for example, that all seems to be moving very fast and very positively. Secondly, I think that the work, particularly around multi-agency safeguarding hubs, so-called MASHs, in Birmingham but also right across the West Midlands, has been incredibly important in providing an operating model, a series of processes and systems at the heart of safeguarding our children and our vulnerable adults that simply wasn't around previously in any joined up way. And I think that approach to working right across agencies as core business has been really important in protecting our vulnerable communities. And then thirdly, more specifically, we've seen, even over the 2 years that I've been here, a much sharper focus on what we're doing to tackle child sexual exploitation and all the harms that go along with that. When I came here, to be honest, I was a bit surprised that although we talked about it, we didn't really know in hard data terms what the scale of the threat was and what therefore our operational response should be. And I feel as a region we've come an awful long way in getting to grips with one of those hidden crimes that is, most perplexing and most worrying to parents, to children themselves and to communities. And I think we can say genuinely to people across the West Midlands, we haven't eradicated this as a threat yet, but we are much closer to having a full sense of what the nature of that threat is, and therefore knowing the nature of the threat, we can grip it.
You've more or less answered this anyway, but a quote from the press release when you arrived in the West Midlands was that you wanted to transform services for children and vulnerable people. Now, as you say, it may not be job completed yet because it's an ongoing task, but do you feel that transformation is sort of well on its way?
I think there's been real progress across the region, and I do think that for Birmingham, the setting up and then the development of the MASH has been instrumental in that. I'm not for one moment underplaying the important individual contributions that agencies make in fulfilling their responsibilities, but there's something quite profound when you look at the complexity of the issues that affect children and families at risk, about having a system at the core that brings that capability across a wide range of agencies. There's something like a dozen different agencies contributing directly to the information and intelligence and expertise that drives the MASH. There's something quite profound about working in that way, because it's not a typical way of working. Most agencies for many years have tended to view partnership as something you do on top of the day job. The MASH is the day job. It is at the heart of what we're trying to do to protect children and vulnerable people. And I think in Birmingham, as elsewhere in Coventry, Sandwell, and now about to go live in Walsall and Solihull, the MASH is at the very core of that process. Just having a MASH doesn't solve anything, and indeed it can generate even more referrals and therefore put more pressure on the system. But it's the clarity of the decision making, it's the collective confidence of the assessments that are being made, and the collective resolution about how to then take the investigation forward, or the work with the individual parents and children forward that makes, I think, a huge difference.
So anyone who does work across different organisations and agencies will know how difficult that can be. Was that a real challenge to get those agencies all moving in the same direction?
Undoubtedly, and it's a continuing challenge. I completely understand why, particularly at senior levels, leaders worry about the reputation of their organisations, because if their reputation as an organisation takes a hit, the confidence from the public then starts to diminish. But it is, in my view, profoundly looking at issues the wrong way around. If you focus on your organisation's reputation as the starting point for what you want to do, what in fact is absolutely necessary is for these organisations to work together in a seamless way, recognising the different capabilities that they've got, otherwise they'd just all be one organisation. So they have different skills, they have different roles, they have different statutory functions. But if you pull it all together, you will then deliver clearer and better outcomes for the children and the vulnerable families that you're serving. And from that will flow a better reputation. So the reputation of the organisation is a consequence, not a driver of what you're trying to do. And I think that's an important lesson, because I think one of the most powerful things that came out of Rotherham, which was a significant moment for me in this 2-year period, in reminding everyone in the West Midlands about the dangers of not focusing on child sex exploitation, in fact, but actually focusing on it in a defensive and insular way. And what that series of reports said, amongst many other things, was that the local authority there viewed CSE as a high risk to its organisation, but in terms of its reputation to the organisation, rather than the risks to children themselves in the real world. If you don't focus on the real risk, your organisation, you will lose sight of what's important, and your organisation will go down the wrong road in terms of trying to respond to it. And that sense of shared mission, that focus on children, that focus on vulnerable communities, you get the energy from those agencies working across the piece to deal with that, because so many frontline professionals, in my view, absolutely get the need to do that. They get the fact that you can't deal with child abuse without looking at domestic violence. You can't look at what's happening in the context of the school without looking at what's happening in the home or in the health centre. And to bring all that together and to bring the collective energy of those frontline people together is what makes a real difference.
Now, obviously, people looking back at your 2 years in Birmingham will look at results and
Yep.
Things improved. In your opinion, and I know we can't eradicate the threat, no one ever will, however, are children and vulnerable people safer in the West Midlands now than they were 2 years ago?
Yes, I think they are, and I would give you the following sort of bits of evidence really that I think are key to this. First of all, we've seen significant increases in reports across the vast bulk of these types of offences that are horribly intimate, that are really touch on the confidence that people have to go to statutory agencies, all the voluntary sector, and I'm absolutely clear that the increase in reporting is a positive sign of greater confidence that agencies will do something about it, not that the problems have got worse. So increasing in victim reporting is an important indicator of this. Increase in enforcement activity is really important to send a very clear message to perpetrators that we know you are targeting vulnerable people because you think no one cares about them, and we are determined to make your life increasingly unpleasant and miserable, and ultimately to lock some of you away, because these are serious crimes. And although we've still got a lot more to do on that, the sheer volume of increase in police investigations, in local government activity, in the intelligence we get from other agencies to support that is really positive. The third, and in a way, I think the most important to get a clear sense of further improvement over the next few months is to see what's happening to our highest risk children. So I'm very clear that when we look at child sex exploitation or domestic violence or risks around things like FGM, we need to look at a large number of children and vulnerable people who are at risk. That is to say that we can intervene before they get the full harm caused to them. And therefore we need to have a good sense of that vulnerability across the piece. But we've also got to be very clear that there are some people in the West Midlands right here and right now being exploited and abused, and we've got to be very swift and very decisive in our interventions to reduce the horrible harm that's being caused to them. So literally in the next few months, because we've now got the data that can track this, I expect to see greater numbers of overall children being identified at risk of child sex exploitation, for example, and that will be a good thing because that will mean our radar is more rounded and more comprehensive. But at the highest level, the so-called level 3 categories, those currently being abused and exploited, I want to see the number, which currently for the region stands at around 113, I want to see that number start to come down. So one of the messages I think we'll say to people in the West Midlands is we are getting a clearer picture of risk across the region, and at the same time we are bringing down those that are currently at the highest level of risk, because they're the ones we particularly want to immediately intervene and support.
Now, I was going to ask about the next challenge, but you've just explained that. It is a task, this, I guess, that never ends, isn't it? In that there will always be a next challenge.
Yes, I think some of these crimes are definitely ones where we should be able to say within maybe 10 years we can eradicate. The obvious one for me is female genital mutilation. There is no justifiable religious or any other ideological justification for female genital mutilation. It is solely a cultural issue, and it's a cultural issue that we know takes place in a whole range of countries in both Africa and Asia, and we know that we can intervene on in our neighbourhoods in this country to stop that happening either here or children being acted upon overseas. And we know that many parents and grandparents and others who do this out of a misplaced sense of traditional values that are actively harming their children. They're not doing it because they're bad people, they're doing it because their cultural frame of reference is simply out of place. And we can address that and we can eradicate it. Some other forms of violence in the home, sexual violence, and we'll all have our own theories about this, but there is something about some aspects of human nature that make this a horrible reality that we're not going to simply eradicate. But I'm very clear that we can make it increasingly a shameful and unacceptable set of behaviours for people to even contemplate doing, let alone acting upon, and particularly in any communities where at the moment there's still a sense with some victims that somehow it's their fault that they get abused and exploited, whether it's in the home or by criminal gangs or by networks of young men. It's absolutely not their fault in any shape or circumstance. However, whatever they've done, because we've all done things as teenagers that put us into contact with people who might have abused us, and the victims have just been incredibly unlucky, and they need to feel the full weight of the support, not only from statutory agencies but from communities behind them, and the shame and the fear and the sense of being out of step with our communities needs to be completely felt by the perpetrators, and that's the shift we still need to see more of. And at the moment, I would think that will be at least another 3 to 4 years before we completely nail that.
Is that something that was missing, not just in the West Midlands? You know, in the 2 years you've been here, you mentioned Rotherham, we've seen other high-profile cases, certainly cases involving people of note, if you like, as well. But for too long, was it almost too easy to get away with whatever people were getting away with?
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt of that. It's unquestionably something that happened across the country. It's unquestionably one of those really difficult periods in our sort of national psyche, if you like, where we have to say that we kind of lost our bearings, that collectively we knew what was right and what was wrong, and that as a society we all get the fact that the harms done to children and vulnerable people are things that are particularly serious, but because this type of activity didn't always fit our frame of reference in terms of what a victim looked like, or indeed what perpetrators looked like, we kind of assumed it wasn't happening to anything like the extent it was. We've also got to recognise that it's been further fuelled, although I don't believe the overall numbers of perpetrators are growing because some of the impact that we're doing on enforcement, but it has been further fuelled by a really noxious online culture, which does two things in my view. First of all, it generates a level of expectation on teenagers, girls and boys, about how accessible they become to all sorts of people in all sorts of circumstances, which are inappropriate. Secondly, and even more seriously, it reinforces a culture, as I would describe it, a culture of sexual behaviour that is entirely predatory, entirely abusive in its nature, because it's predicated on men in particular doing whatever they want on the happy assumption that they can do whatever they want to whoever they choose to do it to. That way of describing the nature of sexual relationships is profoundly damaging. It won't generate massive extra numbers of perpetrators because most boys, teenagers, others are sensible enough to realise what a stupid and unrealistic way of framing relationships it is. But it will legitimise people who would, you know, have a sense of relationships in a rather distorted lens because of their own family environment or because of their own social networks. It will reinforce that to them, and we're not doing enough to confront that. One of the things I'm most excited about, that again is a West Midlands product, probably the first in the country, that will be launched in the next few weeks, just after I leave, is a film, 5 or 6 minutes I think, that will be targeted particularly at the attitudes of teenage boys, and to reinforce why that ideology, as I describe it, is so completely inappropriate and shameful, actually, without sounding too old-fashioned about it. It is genuinely shameful that we've facilitated, through the most ubiquitous forms of communication, a way of viewing what sexual relationships are all about that has nothing to do with reality, and certainly has nothing to do with respecting girls or women or boys or men.
I'm almost at the end, really. You've talked about lessons learned by the region, also lessons you've learned. Are there elements where, when you return to the Home Office, you can talk to other regions to say, look, this is what's happened in the West Midlands, and maybe you can learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the West Midlands has tended to view itself as sometimes ignored by national government, sometimes less part of the sort of devolution debate. That is clearly changing. So there is for me both something about the substantive lessons of moving a collaborative model into what I would describe as core business for a whole range of agencies. That is really important for the rest of the country. And again, it's the West Midlands saying it in all humility. It's not that we've done it all perfectly, but that we know this is the way to manage public services in the future, especially as money gets ever tighter. And there is also something about the energy and dynamic that I see in this region when it is entrusted to some degree with a level of responsibility for collectively getting its act together on really tricky problems like violence against vulnerability, but also like mental health, like the criminal justice system more generally, like the skills gap. All these areas are being looked at by the work being led by the 7 local authority leaders and chief executives around public service reform. And I think that's a huge agenda. I think the West Midlands is catching up, as it were, with Greater Manchester as the sort of leading exponent of what can be done at a regional level. I think government is well aware that for too long the rest of the country has been somewhat dwarfed by the economic regeneration and development of London, and that there is a genuine need for economic rebalancing. But the point is, you can't rebalance the economy if you don't have people within those parts of the country feeling confident, feeling skilled, feeling positive about working to improve the lives of the communities that they come from. And that for me is why the economic side of a powerhouse, if that's what we could call the West Midlands, and the social side of it go absolutely hand in hand. And I think the work we've been doing on violence vulnerability in its own small way, has been a sort of leading exponent of what energy and what impact you can get from working together like that.
Final question. We've talked about what next for the region. What next for you?
So I'm going back to London. I've literally got to decide by the end of this week, because I've got a couple of roles that I'm in discussion with. I'm trying to build on my learning here as in previous roles, as you would expect. But whatever I do, I genuinely expect to still have a connection with the West Midlands and other parts of the country. I do not want to go back to an ivory tower in Whitehall, as I think many other bureaucrats have found. When they get exposed to the real world, they find it genuinely very energising, frustrating at times, but also really central to what they think they're trying to do to deliver better services for communities. So what gets me out of bed in the morning, I think, is what I see gets many people here really energised, which is making a difference, improving the chances and the opportunities that communities in this part of the country can have. And it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to have been doing that for a couple of years here.